Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Jan Roller, and I am president of the club. Today, we are very honored to have as our speaker Alexander M. Cutler, better known as Sandy Cutler, CEO of Eaton Corporation, Cleveland's largest Fortune 500 business. It's been said that Mr. Cutler can never be accused of fearing change or shrinking from a challenge. Mad Money host Jim Cramer calls him a fabulous CEO. During a 2009 interview, he gave Mr. Cutler credit for positioning Eaton to weather the recent economic slump far better than most industrial companies. Eaton began in Cleveland in 1914 as the Torbenson Axle Company. By the time Mr. Cutler became CEO in 2000, it derived more than 40% of its revenue from the automotive sector. But by 2009, only 12% of Eaton's sales of $11.9 billion came from automotive. He sold off 40% of the company's operations and replaced them with acquisitions and initiatives in the electrical, hydraulic systems, and aerospace industries. The company was trading at about $31 per share when he took over as CEO. Today, its shares trade for about $70. But it's not just in the boardroom where Sandy Cutler is making dramatic changes and improvements. Last fall, he stepped in to alter Cleveland's political landscape by helping to lead the county reform effort. He felt strongly that the change would help attract business and would bolster the region's economic development. He was the leader in raising the funds for Issue 6, which helped the measure pass by a surprising 2-to-1 margin. He also did what few others thought possible: consolidate 3 major nonprofits with similar goals into one stronger organization. He became the first chair of the Greater Cleveland Partnership, a merger of the former Greater Cleveland Growth Association, Greater Cleveland Roundtable, and Cleveland Tomorrow. Sandy grew up in Milwaukee and credits his parents for his leadership skills. He watched his father build and run a successful law practice, while his mother spent much of her time volunteering in the community, including heading up the city's United Way campaign. After his Yale undergraduate degree and Dartmouth MBA, he started as a financial analyst with Cutler Hammer, Inc., a company run by his uncle. The company was eventually acquired by Eaton Corporation, and Sandy began his ascent to the top of the company. As the Plain Dealer's front page story announced today, Eaton broke ground yesterday for its new $170 million world headquarters in Beechwood. The move from downtown Cleveland has not been without criticism, but as Joe Roman, CEO of the Greater Cleveland Partnership, stated, Cutler is a marketplace person. He understands that boundaries that were established 150 years ago don't have much place in today's world. He pursued a strategy to find the right location for his company to continue to grow. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podium Sandy Cutler.
Jan, thanks very much for that generous introduction, and thank you to the City Club and to all of you for turning out here today to give me a chance to share some thoughts about competitiveness with you. I think there are a few concepts as we all debate what's going on around the world today that are more important to a community, to a city, or to a country than the concept of competitiveness. And let me simply define competitiveness as being able to grow that set of conditions or environment that allow investments to be made, that allow wages to be received, that allow a community to be successful. Whereas we can't find an increase in standard of living in any community that's not competitive. Now, why do I want to take on a subject like competitiveness in a group like this? It's obviously a big, bold subject. It's arguably one that tends to be controversial. But in my estimation, there is an absolutely shocking understanding of competitiveness, and our country is quickly losing its competitiveness agenda. It's important to every one of us, regardless of age, background, city, community, state, or anywhere within this country. I think it is time that we must start down a very different path than the disastrous path that we're seeing that we are on in this country. A couple economic projections, maybe to set my comments in perspective, and then I'd like to tell you what I think the path is that we need to pursue within the United States to ensure that we're still a relevant nation some 20 years from now. Private enterprise fueled by, and importantly, by market competition. Private enterprise is also girded by important regulations from both state, federal, municipal governments. But if you put all that together, what has been created in the United States is a $14 trillion remarkable achievement, and that is our economy. Now, when you think about a $14 trillion economy that obviously has many participants and many different elements to it, it covers many different industries, but yes, it covers every individual resident of our country. And when you think about $14 trillion and think about what the news writes about every day, is we hear about the size of the Chinese economy. Well, the U.S. economy is still roughly 3 times bigger than the Chinese economy. It is the world's largest economy. It is a mature economy. And as a mature economy, it does go through cycles. And so we and other Americans have seen both our economy grow, and we've also seen it as a mature economy go through difficult times, such as we've witnessed over the last 2.5 years. Economic history tells us that it is not possible to regulate a business cycle. But it has become in vogue during the last 18 months to talk about the ability of a government to eliminate business cycles. I, for one, don't believe it. I think what you have to do is set the environment that allows a country to grow, its citizens to be profitable, jobs to be created, and that economic wealth to be a source of taxes for a government that helps then set the environment correctly for competition. Growth in the mature economies of the world, and let me define that by U.S., Western Europe, and Japan, have really begun to slow substantially. We see that not only reflected in what's happened in birth rates in these countries, but we see it in terms of their GDP. Many of us grew up at a time that those were the job-creating areas of the world. That simply is not true. The developing nations of the world today, like China, like India, like Brazil, like the Middle East, like Eastern Europe, are growing at a multiple of what we experience in the 3 mature areas of the world. And yes, so are the birth rates. And as a result, we live in aging nations, nations that are beset by increasing debt problems, and nations that simply must find the way for Americans to access the jobs that are being created in those other important areas of the world. A couple numbers, just to give you a sense. The U.S. GDP in 2009 comprised about 26% of the U.S. GDP. It is expected to decline to 18% by 2050. Now, you hear those numbers and you think to yourself, well, gee, that's a long time. There's no sense for urgency. But if you dig further within those numbers, what you'll see is that if you put together our traditional trading partners, Western Europe, Japan, and the U.S., it was true that those countries were at about 67% of the world GDP. They're forecast to decline to 34%. That is an enormous change, and it is happening today. It's not simply out ahead of us. Obviously, this means the faster-growing region of the world, as I mentioned, are growing at a very fast rate, and they will be growing to almost 66% of the world GDP by 2050, up from 37%. That defines both the economic challenge and the economic opportunity for Americans. Simultaneous with this shift in where growth will be around the world is the fact that the world is fundamentally more interconnected in terms of global trade today. It is not possible for nations to be successful by building tariffs around them and pretending that the world is not interconnected. Foreign trade was less than 20% of global GDP in 1990. Today it's almost 30%, and it is accelerating. So the implications, I think, are very clear from a competitive point of view if we will look at facts and not simply the politics around trade. The United States must find a way to compete in a global environment that increasingly will be more global. More of the new jobs, more of the new wealth is being created outside of the U.S. And yes, that means more of the innovation, and the high-value innovation jobs are happening there as well. So the stakes have gone up. The pace of change is accelerating. As I mentioned, the opportunity for success is enormous, but if we don't get this right, it is the most fundamental change this country may have ever encountered in terms of its forward-looking standard of life. So let's start with some basics. If we're going to change all of this, what do we need to do? And I don't want to simply leave you with a set of problems, because I think there are a set of opportunities that can reverse these trends and make it an advantageous environment for the United States.